Item 4, Justin will give us a presentation on the NECP Goal 2 Compendium.
And I want to apologize to everybody for not having that last presentation up on the web. This has been a very fast-moving thing, and we were literally making edits this morning just beforehand. So as soon as the meeting is over, we will post that last presentation up on the web for people to take a look at. Shifting gears a little bit, we spent the majority of 2 years ago talking about NECP Goal 1, and then last year with the NECP Goal 2 for all of our non-Pima and Maricopa counties. And so this presentation today is a highlight of what we learned last year during our 13 observations, some of the things that were discussed, some of the lessons learned, recommendations made, that type of thing. So we go through briefly some of the background. I think everybody here has probably heard a significant amount of Goal 2, so we're not going to have to spend too much time on that. But I do want to talk about kind of how these assessments were measured and conducted. A document that we presented to the PSCC last month and it's since distributed to all county emergency managers, our Compendium of Findings and Recommendations. We actually could make that title longer. In fact, we have. But and I'll also go through some high-level summary of what we found. As we had said all along throughout this process, each individual county's AAR is specific to that county and those jurisdictions. So we're not doing scores and that type of thing. Instead, we're doing a high-level kind of comparison, aggregate data across the board. So just by way of background, of course, the National Emergency Communications Plan is what kicked off all of this, and the key component in the NECP was it looked at a broad area of ways to improve public safety response. Everything from planning, governance, operating procedures, trainings, etc. And on top of that, it does what we like to do in government, establishing benchmarks, performance metrics, goals, that type of thing. And so the key concern for our agency was those benchmarks for establishing and demonstrating response level emergency communications. And those translated out into the 3 goals, as I mentioned, and we all know. Goal 1 was our urban areas, Phoenix and Tucson. Goal 2 was, by last year, 75% of the non-UWASI jurisdictions had to demonstrate response level emergency communications within 1 hour of a routine event involving multiple jurisdictions. Next year, we'll be looking at Goal 3. This one is a little bit different. The key thing there is at the end, it's 3 hours within a significant event. And those significant events are, as outlined in national planning scenarios. Not going to get into Goal 3 too much today, but that's not something that, from everything we're hearing, that's going to be pushed down onto the states to have to deal with. That is actually something that the Office of Emergency Communications and others are going to have to figure out how to measure. And
you'd like to argue, but on Goal 3, that can be revised. National Emergency Communications Plan, like any decent document, I'll leave it at that, it's a living document, and they're looking at revising it. The next revision, their old Goal 3 will change a little bit.
You have a feel for how?
No, I do not.
It's actually very timely because the 2013 statewide exercise is a major power outage, which would create some interesting situations for communications.
And for those who may not know, this is Tom Wallace with the Office of Emergency Communications. He's our regional representative. We don't get him much. We often have him out in Hawaii and Guam, but he's got him today.
Yeah, meeting with him in Hawaii.
They don't take us with them out to Hawaii, unfortunately. But the key in all of this, though, is the definition of what response level communications means. And that is the capacity of individuals with primary operational leadership and the responsibility to manage resources and make timely decisions during an incident. It is not simply the, hey, did the radio work? Was it on? Could I hear stuff? It was everything that goes into having the primary operational leadership be able to make decisions to manage an incident. Is the event organized in such a way to allow effective communication? Obviously, things like 10 codes and plain language we've talked a lot about. So that definition there is a very broad definition. And I'll get into kind of how the Office of Emergency Communications fleshed that out more fully and how we then took and ran with it with Goal 2. We each had, OEC required every state to measure both capabilities and performance. 2 years ago, through Homeland Security's Target Capabilities Assessment, the capabilities data was collected from all jurisdictions. And that was kind of where does everybody stand on the 5 different lanes of the continuum. How are we at with governance? Where are we at with procedures? That type of thing. In 2010, the OEC conducted the observations for Phoenix and Tucson. Up in Phoenix, it was for the NASCAR spring race, and in Tucson, it was a big air show down at Davis-Monthan. Both jurisdictions did very well on that. And then, obviously, last year it was the opportunity for all non-UOSC jurisdictions to demonstrate against the goal. So our office worked with the county emergency managers in all 13 counties, and in some cases a specific event point of contact was also designated to set up the assessments for an event, some type of routine planned event that would be able to demonstrate that response level communications. These are supposed to be large kind of public events with multiple public safety agencies involved, and then be managed, of course, in compliance with NIMS, ICS. Kind of a big one in all of this. That, for each county, was somewhat different. A large event in Greenlee County is much different than a large event in Mojave County, for example. But we worked with all 13 counties, identified events, and then put together some observation teams. Those events, throughout all 13 events, there were over 116 different state, local, and NGO organizations that participated in the events themselves. 12 different tribes were involved, and 6 different federal agencies had involvement in one event or another throughout the process. So we definitely had the multiple jurisdiction agency component satisfied. So with those events, our office assembled observation teams, very much like the Office of Emergency Communications did with Goal 1. We brought in experts both locally from state agencies and from out of state. Each observation team tended to, not all of them, but most of them tended to have at least one person from a federal agency observing, one person from a state agency, and one person from a jurisdiction of similar size. These observation teams, depending on the event, were between 5 and 8 people. They came out and took a look, and all 32 of those people, we are very grateful for volunteering their time to do those observations. Nationally, all the data had to be submitted last fall. Arizona was one of only 22 states that actually completed and responded with all of our deadline by the data, or by the deadline in October. This graphic's a little bit out of date as of the end of January, but you can see there are actually still some counties that have not yet, or as of the end of January, had not submitted both capabilities and performance data. But Arizona was one of those to get it all done on time. So from those observations, there were, after each event, the observation teams in the PSIC office produced an after-action report and an improvement plan for each county, where the observations were documented and a series of recommendations were made across all the different elements that were observed. And that was done for each county. It was a rather significant process. Each report, roughly 50 to 60 pages. from each of those after-action reports, we have gone through and compiled all the high-level recommendations. Now, the recommendations are slightly different from county to county, even when they're talking about the same thing because of the differences in observation teams, etc. But what we have done is created the Arizona Compendium of Findings and Recommendations from NECP Goal 2 observations. This is posted on our website on the NECP page. I didn't print it out because this is 4 pages per page, and it's still rather large. So it's a rather large document, but it is all the various recommendations that were made throughout the state to help improve planning. We do recommend that jurisdictions take a look at this, particularly some of the lessons learned and best practices that were documented in here, and kind of compare this both to how your jurisdiction did versus the state overall, and as well, kind of, it can be used as a reference point for future planning efforts, particularly policy development, those types of things. The compendium, as well as the after-action reports, are organized by 3 primary categories that were used to evaluate Goal 2. Common policies and procedures, responder roles and responsibilities, and then communication systems, quality, and continuity. So those are the 3 kind of high-level areas that OEC established to evaluate the performance. And then within each of those, I believe there's about 27 different elements and questions that were specifically asked and evaluated, and we'll get into those here. From a high level, the policies and procedures section, this one was actually, I don't want to say the most critical, but one of the observations that we found when looking at all of the data is jurisdictions that had problems demonstrating within this particular category had problems throughout the entire process. The policies and procedures section really was a very good indicator on the success of the event overall and the ability to demonstrate response level communications. So the first one on interagency communications, policies and procedures were common or consistent amongst all responding agencies. And again, all of these different elements are the exact same elements that were used for measuring Goal 1. For Arizona, we had all of the agencies had at least some level of policies and procedures that were consistent. Unfortunately, 5 of our counties, and sorry if I say agencies, I'm really referring to the event overall, the assessment. But 5 of the county events were either all or most cases met this. 8 of them had some issues one way or the other, whether the policies and procedures didn't exist, etc. And this is element 1.1. And so that kind of breakdown, the 8 to 5, you're kind of going to see this several times throughout the presentation here. The second section, were they written? Again, having the policies and procedures that are, there is a recognition that custom and tradition can become a policy and procedure, but the necessity to have these things written is rather important. And the failure to have documented policies and procedures was again, a leading indicator overall. The next element, were those policies and procedures followed throughout the event? For a vast majority of our agencies, or excuse me, our jurisdictions, the answer to that was yes. 5 all of the time, 5 some of the time, and 3 that were most of the time. So again, we had a fairly good consistency throughout the state on following the established policies and procedures. We would have liked to have seen that some of the time be a little bit smaller, but for the most part it was there. The second question, though, was, did the established policies and procedures exist between responding agencies for request, activation, accountability, deactivation, etc., for communications equipment. To rephrase that, did the county have a TICP or similar document that showed how assets should be used, how to get them, how to deploy them? This was actually a two-part question. First, did they exist? And only in 3 cases did those exist. In 9 cases, nothing existed. For those 4 agencies, the 3 that were all and the 1 that was in some cases, were they followed? If a jurisdiction had a TICP or similar document, it was followed. And again, you can see how this kind of breakdown goes throughout. It became very difficult without those types of things in place overall to handle the different other elements that are within this observation. So element 3, the policies and procedures were consistent with NIMS after taking a look at the getting copies of the policies and procedures both beforehand and then doing interviews at dispatch centers and with other people throughout the event. The teams evaluated it to make sure that it was consistent with NIMS. This one was somewhat mixed. Overall, there was NIMS consistency. But again, 3 counties did not have policies or procedures consistent with NIMS. Was a priority order established for the use of different communication resources? Whether it was in an SOP, like if they were using AIR's SOP, thanks to this body, has a priority order established. But if they were using other channels, we had to look at the SOPs to know about it. And again, if you didn't have the documented policies and procedures, it was not possible to have a priority order established in those policies and procedures. And so you'll see we're back to this 5-8 kind of split. But for those 4 counties, I should say, really the 5 counties that did have documented policies and procedures, there was a priority order, and for the most part it was followed either all or most of the time. Element 5, the talk path, primary talk path for interagency communications was clearly established and communicated to all responders early in the event. Arizona did fantastic on this. All across the board, it was established, well, for 11 counties, it was established by procedures, typically through an incident action plan. In 2 instances, it was established ad hoc early in the event. But so all 13 jurisdictions did well on element 5 here. Plain language, there are several that relate to plain language here. This is one that, for the most part, we did fairly good. I think we had presentations. Graham County, if I'm remembering right, was one that jumped straight to plain language to this and was very successful in it. So this was what was observed. Only in 1 case was plain language not used throughout the event. In some counties, there were minor lapses here and there. This slide is actually, even though it says no, this slide is good. It's basically saying, was there a problem using plain language? Did anything, both from a primary leadership level or a responder level, was there a problem due to lack of common terminology? So, didn't have problems when plain language was used. Clear unit identification procedures. Again, it kind of gets down to the, you're probably going to be tired of me saying, again, it gets back down to documented policies and procedures, but you'll see that kind of 8-5 roughly split in this case. 7 jurisdictions used clear unit ID procedures throughout the event amongst their primary operational leadership. In some cases, it was not used at all or only some of the time. This question is a follow-up to that on, was it reused from the response level personnel during the event? Common channel names. A lot of this was, consistency with, are the radios programmed the same as the ICS 205? across different agencies? Are they all referring to AIR-5 as AIR-5? Or do we have the old IAIRS kind of nomenclature from years ago? But for the most part, the jurisdictions in Arizona did really good on the interagency communications channels. All had consistent naming conventions and common naming conventions. A secondary question to that was the use of the NIFOG related channels. Were those channels that were programmed in the radios or in the IAP or ICS 205, were they the same as what's in the NIFOG? So that, you know, a responder coming in from out of state, he's got his NIFOG channels on. Is everybody going to be on the same page? But again, for the most part, it was there, but there were 4 jurisdictions that did not have NIFOG channels at all. And again, this body helped to address that over the last year with the development of the Arizona Interoperable Channels Plan. So that's the section on policy, standards, and procedures. Want to pause? Anybody have questions at this point? Category 2, responder roles and responsibilities. In this instance, you know, it was how was span of control demonstrated? How was incident command set up? This was kind of looking at the people now that were managing the event from a responder level. Element 9 is multiple organizations with inherent responsibility for some portion of the event were present and joined in a unified command with a single individual designated as the ops section chief, or excuse me, designated with those ops section chief responsibilities. Didn't have to have a designated ops section chief, you just had to have a designated person who had those responsibilities. For the most part, again, did really good on this. 10 of the 13 counties did have a single individual carrying out those responsibilities throughout the operational period. Span of control, there are a few questions related to that. First, at that operational section chief level, did they manage more than 7 subordinates at any time? And I actually have the colors reversed on this slide. The no is the good answer on this. In 7 instances, they did not manage more than 7 people. In other words, 7 of our counties effectively had span of control, maintained span of control. The downside to all this is that in 6 different events, there were problems with span of control. You know, some of the time the span of control, though, were things that related, again, back to the policies and procedures. If a clear organizational chart wasn't included within an incident action plan, or had they included a clear organizational chart in the incident action plan, it would have been apparent that there were too many people reporting to the ops section chief. And so that's why I've kind of been emphasizing the importance of policies and procedures throughout this, because we really did pick up that trend through many of the events. First level subordinates to the ops section chief, did they manage more than 7 subordinates at any time? A little bit better here. 9 of our counties did not have any span of control problems on the first level subordinates issue. And in 3 of the jurisdictions, there were some problems. Now moving into the communications unit leader, were they carried out either by the incident commander, a COML, you know, their designee, and then did the COML perform their function? Were communications resources effectively ordered using those policies and procedures? Was a communications plan established and followed? In 10 of the 13 jurisdictions, a COML was specifically filled during the event. So a little bit better. Some of our counties were right on that border. You'll see we've got these 10 3s and we've got the 8 5s. But having the COML was actually a rather important part overall in the process, because there are, I believe, 7 questions related to the COML. So were those roles and responsibilities carried out by the individual. First was it designated, then were the roles and responsibilities carried out. Here it was a little bit more mixed. Obviously, if there was no COML designated, then there was no one carrying out those roles and responsibilities. But so looking at the 10, for the most part, 6 were always done by the COML. In some cases, or there were responsibilities that were not carried out by the COML. Were communication resources effectively ordered? For the most part, again, did really good on this question. I will explain that NA there. In one of the jurisdictions, all the responding personnel use their day-to-day operations communications equipment, and so they're issued with and always have, so there was no communication resources that needed to be ordered. And so that's what that NA represents. That was not a ding on that agency. It was a neutral, this question did not apply to that specific jurisdiction. Were they ordered using documented procedures? Only in 3 cases were the communication resources ordered using the correct procedures. Now they got credit for having all of the things, but if those procedures or the equipment arrived, etc., either they didn't have documented policies or procedures, or it wasn't followed, or it wasn't ordered appropriately according to those procedures, then it fell into that none were category. So this obviously is an element that can be addressed through a number of different ways, but one that needs to be looked at. Was a communications plan established by procedure, developed early in the event? In all 13 events, it absolutely was. Did the plan actually meet the needs of primary operational leadership? Getting back to that response level communications definition, in 7 of the 13 counties, the communications plan met the needs. Now moving on to the third and final category, communication systems, quality and continuity. And now we're getting much more into the discussion about how the technology functioned during the event. Were there failures and disruptions, and how did it respond? So the first question on element 12 is no more than 1 out of every 10 transmissions were repeated amongst the primary operational leadership due to failure of initial communications attempts. For the most part, there were no, or 9 of our jurisdictions did not have problems with communication. And I should clarify here that this 1 out of every 10, that there was not an observer sitting, listening to all channels all day, keeping score. This was kind of the higher level understanding of, were there problems or not with those initial communication attempts? Were there lots of static issues, clipping issues, those types of things? Yes, lots of the repeatings that were observed throughout the event. If there was a failure of overload of any communications modes, was a backup provided? The first way this question or element was looked at was a resource available? Was it in the incident action plan or at SIEC, etc.? Was the event properly planned for, that if there was some type of a system, there would be backup resources available? 9 of our jurisdictions had that kind of proper planning, let's say, ahead of time. In 4 cases, there were no backup resources available. Did the primary mode fail during the event at any time? 10 jurisdictions had no problem. But three jurisdictions, there was a failure. However, in all 3 cases, a backup was effectively provided, which, again, having a failure of your communications mode wasn't a problem. The real trick was, was it effectively provided? And so the view of this is, in all 13 of our counties, this really is a pass. Element 14, primary operational leadership communicated adequately to manage resources and make timely decisions during the event or incident. This is kind of the catch-all overall of, and getting back to the definition of response level communications. Could the leadership make the decisions and manage the event, and did he have the ability to do that through all facets of communication? 5 of our counties all of the time, 5 some of the time, or excuse me, 5 most of the time. 3 counties, they were able to do it some of the time. You probably have been able to see a kind of a trend throughout here now. So that's at a high level. Those were the 14 different elements, 27 when you count all the sub-elements and sub-questions there that each of the counties were measured on. For the most part, Arizona did fairly well. We have areas for improvement, particularly in the areas of policies and procedures and how that followed through. We've made significant progress over the last year. We think one of the best successes was the use of plain language throughout the event. And certainly due to this body's work, the Arizona Interoperable Channels Plan is out there. We've done a tremendous amount of work and will continue to through the Arizona Communications Unit Training Program. So we are making significant progress on this. Moving forward, we encourage jurisdictions, and you can, and I should say, again, back to the compendium, while those summary level data there is not in the compendium, you can go back, look at the compendium, and be able to see, all right, what were the recommendations that were being made across each of those different elements and how they fit. With the caveat that in some cases, the recommendation may appear in a different location in a specific after-action report as opposed to in the compendium, but all the recommendations should be in here. But jurisdictions can use their after-action reports and the compendium for planning within their county, particularly for upcoming planned events and responding to incidents. We would also encourage folks to compare their results with the responding statewide on each individual observational element, and to kind of think about those factors when moving forward and determining the county's plan for how to address the gaps and findings. From our office's standpoint, we have already started to use the findings from Goal 2, both from a policy and planning section. Of course, we've been talking throughout about how we are using our resources and support services to try and address some of these gaps, both from a TICP development standpoint. We are much further along right now in having TICPs in Arizona than we were at the beginning of last year. The Communications Unit Training Program, we're going to be developing template policies and SOPs to distribute out to stakeholders so that we can help primarily address that gap right up at the top about documented written policies and procedures. The development of federal grant applications for the non-UWASI county emergency managers all received a template grant application, albeit rather late in the planning this cycle due to the grant rollout process, for helping to close NECP Goal 2 gaps. We also submitted for every county that doesn't currently have a TICP or a plan in place for getting a TICP, we gave them a template grant application for getting a TICP. And over this course of the next year, we'll continue to work with counties to assist them in their efforts to close the gaps. We also have 2 grants this year, one for the North RAC and one for the South RAC, for specifically addressing Goal 2 gaps within those 2 RACs. Those are, due to the tight structures on funding this year, those were significantly reduced, but we think in the North RAC we'll be able to make significant headway on TICPs and strategic planning, and then the Southern RAC, there's some money there as well to help out. Requests for technical assistance, all of our TAs now, and moving forward, both from a state homeland security and a federal perspective, the goals the NECP Goal 2 outcomes, they view as this is what should be driving the planning and all of our efforts to improve interoperable response level communication. So all of our technical assistance this year, when we submitted those requests back in December, they had to align with our Goal 2 reportings. And the technical assistance that we were awarded was really based on the data that we provided.
Justin, I can put a little input on that as well. Kudos to Arizona for what you guys have done with this. This is obviously a huge lift. And there's always that, well, what's my carrot for this, what's my stick for this? It's obviously a lot of work. And to be honest, we as the feds really didn't have kind of a lot of carrot there. And you guys kind of move forward as the right thing to do. We need to know, where we are state. And we're related, but we now actually have a line in the sand. Any other state this year that put in for technical assistance from the Fed, if they had not completed the Goal 2 stuff, they had to, and there's a lot of states are still behind on this, have not submitted at least a plan how they're going to get there. Because next fiscal year, if you haven't done it, you're getting absolutely no technical assistance from the Fed. Because you guys made this major lift, no issues, you guys move forward, and also potentially what may happen is, even though everyone's doing a small pot of money, we have a large number of states who may or may not need that come FY13, and that means a larger pot now, a larger pot of money for smaller states. You may actually benefit more here because you made the tiers list.
I like the names list.
You got a gold star.
Justin, Jay Barkle County, as being one of those counties on that list, I want to extend that kudos over to the AZPSIC office, and what a great job. And we wouldn't have been able to do half of what we did without their help and their support, and giving the follow-up, documentation, and everything that they've done. They've been so professional. And, just coming off of what Tom's saying, really appreciate you guys helping put that together and continuing to kind of push us. So that's what it is, kicking the pants that we need to move forward and keep on looking out and strengthening themselves.
Thank you, and I really appreciate that, Jay. And Dan had made a comment earlier. I believe it was Dan. I always assume he's the one who makes those comments. But broadband is kind of seems to come in and suck the air out of the room. From our office's standpoint, NECP Goal 2 is not over. We may no longer refer to it as Goal 2. It's improving response level communication. But the gap closure efforts, one of the gaps that grant applications our office submitted this year, likely it won't be funded given other priorities, but was to continue this observation process moving forward, and to hopefully have some funding to be able to go back to some of these counties and reassess. And from a federal perspective, all of those same reporting tools that we had to use during this process are still available online, and we are kind of expected to continue to update and OEC as gaps get closed and as counties continue to improve. That was the last one. I thought there were two more. But with that, which is good, are there any other questions, thoughts on this?
Okay, maybe a question for Tom. Is there a plan federally to come out with the overall Goal 2 for the nation as they did with Goal 1, or was this strictly Goal 2 left to the states and this is what we're going to get for the state? I was just curious, from an NECP perspective, are we going to get a Goal 2 summary?
Or just
the national.
Like a national?
Yeah, kind of a national scorecard, if you will.
That's a question I'll ask when we get back to you.
I was just curious. I know they finally published the Goal 1, which is very beneficial to, especially the UASI, to look at myself compared to the rest of the country and figure out where I stood. And I'm thinking as a smaller county, I might want to look nationally and see where do I baseline against the rest of the country. I just don't know. I think we completed a lot of data that we could submit. I'm not sure that a lot of the other states, I think North Carolina did nothing. So I'm not sure, how much data is going to be available nationally, but.
And I actually do have a presentation that is fairly similar to this, but again, up-leveled significantly on a national basis. The one that was given in Atlanta next week meeting. but all along the Office of Emergency Communications has been consistent, and the data is only going to be shared in an aggregate basis and not, the breakdowns. And we have communicated that on almost every opportunity that we have had, that the individual results are owned by that particular agency, responding agencies in county. But that high-level kind of aggregate data, I think we'll be seeing some more of that summary-wise. Finally, the Goal 2, and actually, Jesse, you might recognize a lot of this because this is the exact same format for the compendium that they created with Goal 1, but we have moved it down to Goal 2. The last thing, the very last couple of pages on the compendium, all of the emergency managers and the events and the 32 individuals that served as observation teams are all listed here, and our office would like to thank everyone that has been involved in the Goal 2 assessment process and really helped to establish that baseline for Arizona on where we stand and where we're going to go.
Nice job.
Do you have anything else?
Look at us. Do we know a timeline for revising the Goal 3 objective and then how it's going to be measured?
We're going to start with, Dan asked that earlier too. I really don't, because what they're going to do is they're going to go back, look at how Goal 1 worked, didn't work, how the Goal 2 worked, didn't work. You're going to see, I know it's going to be modified. It's not going to exist the way you see it now. They're talking about the NECP being revised maybe fall, January, February, and then from that, you probably start seeing Goal 3 solid data on what that's going to look like probably late, quarter 1, second quarter of 13.
I would guess they float the data out on that.
Oh, we never do that. Our data is solid.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Audience? Dan, of course, Dan. We say it was you anyway.
No, along with Jay, you really don't appreciate what you've got until you travel and see what other people are doing and realize how far ahead we are. And like I said, that AZPSIC gets the credit for that, that we're markedly ahead of so many other people that you would expect to be in front of us. And we really, put a great product on the ground. The one thing that's not directly within our purview, but not outside of our ability to influence, you go back to some of those slides. You go back to 9 slides. No, I'm kidding. The one thing, and we saw this in Goal 1 around the country, we've seen it in Goal 2, one of the only slides in there where we didn't make at least 50% was within NIMS. And NIMS was a consistent problem around the country within Goal 1 as well. And it's within AZPSIC purview in terms of doing the commune and getting that going. We're, again, way ahead of the game on everybody. But the incident command system, ICS, I think as we can influence, we need to drive DEMA and all the other characters in the play to not only continue with ICS training, but to push ICS to a comfort level within Arizona. And I think that's, getting the classes out there is one thing, but getting everywhere where it's massaged into place. Much of what we do in communications, in the absence of that universal template, in the absence of everybody having that, that mechanism, makes it difficult. So, and I don't know if that's something, that to start a larger conversation like nobody has enough to do. But I do think we need to drive the NIMS part of this because we can shore up our